Hello Dragonfly Swarm. Sucrose is a very powerful character who's always had a pretty stable play rate thanks to her invaluable role as an animal buffer and enabler, but Dendro has kinda taken that a few steps further. Thanks to her unmatched ability to share large chunks of her elemental mastery to allies, Sucrose has found quite a bit of success slotting herself into some of the strongest Dendro team variants we currently have access to, and I've never made a Sucrose guide, so that is what I'm doing. In this video, I'm gonna elaborate upon everything you need to know in order to build and master Sucrose in 3.0 Genshin Impact by discussing her kit, her constellations, her artifacts, including the new ones she can work with, as well as her best weapons, and of course her exciting new teams. Before I start though, I want to mention that I stream multiple days a week on Twitch, so if you haven't already, you should totally go and follow me and come hang out sometime. But with that out of the way, let's dive right into discussing Sucrose. Starting by discussing the roles she fits into, especially in regards to her flashy new Dendro teams. Sucrose fits amazingly as a buffer support in teams that benefit from elemental mastery, which is a lot of teams. And she can also play as a driver or reaction carry for teams that enjoy her ability to constantly swirl, chain react, and drive off-field units. And in regards to Dendro teams, she can fill both of these roles exceptionally well thanks to the large emphasis on elemental mastery with Dendro reactions, as well as the fact that lots of the game's strongest off-field DPS units have been massively buffed by Dendro's introduction, so Sucrose just naturally has more value than she's ever had. With that all said, I want to dive into what makes her so unique when filling these roles, starting with her attack talent, which as a catalyst user is infused with anemo. Sucrose can perform a 4-hit combo at relatively not slow speed, which allows her to drive off-field DPS units like Fischl, Xingqiu, etc. pretty well, but that's only 25% of the story because with the help of her charge attacks, which don't share ICD with her normal attacks by the way, Sucrose can not only drive off-field DPS characters, but she herself can trigger a ton of reactions thanks to her ability to swirl and chain react her swirls in AoE scenarios. And the best part about this is that you don't actually have to level up her normal attacks to enjoy these properties because most of the damage she's dealing with this driver playstyle is coming from her reactions, not her own scaling. So, moving on to her elemental skill, it actually gives her yet another easy way of proccing reactions because this skill doesn't have any ICD, meaning it can react anytime it hits enemies. The skill itself acts as a means of respectable anemo damage as well as quick crowd control since it sucks enemies towards the center of the cast, and it's also a powerful battery ability since it always generates 4 particles when it hits enemies, but since she summons the circle a ways in front of her, it can be awkward to aim this the way you want to, so you'll have to position accordingly. With her elemental burst, Sucrose tosses a bottle that shatters into this large anemo AoE, which pulls and tosses enemies around for 6 seconds. This ability can absorb other elements to deal anemo damage and absorb elemental damage simultaneously, but it's really weird and inconsistent in how it absorbs elements. Also, the ability can be an inconvenience to some of Sucrose's team comps since it can interfere with other important reactions, and launched enemies can be a bit of an inconvenience in some scenarios, because you know that they're in the air instead of on your fist. Wait, what? And the ability is quite expensive, but with Constellations, Sucrose is very good at battering the heavy burst costs, so that shouldn't be too big of an issue. Plus, as I said, in some teams, she actually doesn't even opt to use her burst. But the main value that Sucrose provides in her respective roles comes actually from her 1st and 4th Ascension passives. At A1, Sucrose will grant 50 elemental mastery to any party members with an element that matches the element she swirls, and she can do this at essentially 100% uptime because the duration resets every time she swirls again. But since she can't swirl Dendro, she can't directly buff Dendro's characters with this passive, but she can with her 4th Ascension. With her 4th Ascension passive, Sucrose will grant 20% of her total elemental mastery to all party members anytime her skill or burst hits enemies, and just like A1, this ability duration can be refreshed, making Sucrose very good at supplying your team with large EM bonuses. Basically, both of her Ascension passives are what make her so potent and unique as an elemental mastery buffer, and with the emphasis on EM and Dendro teams, she is a very valuable unit to slot. But for better or for worse, quite a bit of her potential is locked behind Constellations. Not to say she isn't functional at C0, because she is, she just becomes much better at doing her jobs with Constellations. So let's discuss. At C1, Sucrose gains 1 extra charge of her elemental skill, which is extremely valuable. Not only does it allow her to generate 8 anemo particles almost instantly, but it also allows her a bit more consistency on her crowd control and gives her even greater means of causing swirls and chain reactions. Oh yeah, and it lets her deal more personal anemo damage since her skill scaling modifiers are pretty decent. C2 is alright, but it does pale in comparison to her other constellations, especially considering there are scenarios where she won't even use her burst, so it can be a nice boost to her field presence, but it can also be forgettable. C3 is really nice for extra personal damage on her elemental skill, and since she can essentially spam it, this constellation actually tends to be more valuable than it seems. But at C4, Sucrose can now very confidently step into the role of an anemo driver. Basically, the way it works is every 7 hits of her normal or charge attack will cut the cooldown of her elemental skill by 1 to 7 seconds, which will generally let her spam roughly 2 more skill casts than she otherwise would when playing as an on-field driver. But it's also cool to keep in mind that this constellation will count these 7 hits even if she swaps out the field, so you can theoretically set her up to shorten the skill cooldown before you even use it, for smarter and more effective gameplay. C5 adds 3 levels to Sucrose's burst, which I'd argue is less valuable than her C3, but it still is personal damage, so that's nice. And finally, at C6, Sucrose will now grant a 20% elemental damage bonus to any character matching the element that her burst absorbs with. This is a considerable bonus, don't get me wrong, but absorbing elements is weirdly annoying and difficult with Sucrose's burst, so the reliability of this constellation is questionable. But basically every constellation up to C4 is undeniably valuable on Sucrose and will significantly enhance the value she brings to teams as a buffer and an on-field driver. The safest of which constellations being C1, so if you have the means to do so, try shooting for C1, C3, or C4 as comfortable stopping points for her constellations. Alright, moving onwards to artifacts. I'm actually going to do this section a bit different from how I usually do it. This time around, I'm going to be comparing 2 artifact sets against one another, since generally speaking, most of the player base is aware that anemo characters like Sucrose have a very obvious best set. That set being the 4-piece Viridescent Venerer. The set grants her a nice anemo damage bonus for some added personal damage, but it also grants a massive boost to her swirl damage, and it grants her the ability to shred the resistance of elements she swirls with. So clearly it's her best artifact set because it perfectly suits her best playstyles and allows her to double down on team buffing. But I do want to bring up my comparison with the brand new 4-piece Gilded Dreams set, because in a lot of Dendro related teams that Sucrose plays on, she's the only anemo unit, meaning this set will grant her a whopping 230 elemental mastery in total. What that means is that she herself is losing the benefits of 4-piece Viridescent Venerer for the sake of large EM bonuses, as well as an extra 46 team-wide elemental mastery because of her 4th Ascension passive. So I tested 2 identical teams in Spiral Abyss Floor 12th Chamber 1, one time using Sucrose with 4-piece Viridescent, another time using 4-piece Gilded Dreams, and both times I made sure to save the recordings that I cleared the absolute fastest to show both artifact sets at their strongest potential in this scenario. This is a Hyperbloom team, by the way. And so the idea here is that while Gilded Dreams is definitely not better than 4-piece Viridescent Venerer on Sucrose, it can actually come surprisingly close in some situations. In teams where personal damage is outweighed by reaction damage, such as with some Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Burgeon teams, the extra elemental mastery that Sucrose benefits from can actually help her to carry the team damage output with her reaction damage, as well as the tiny bit of extra reaction damage she provides to the carry of the team. And again, while these bonuses are pretty much strictly worse than the Viridescent bonuses, they're actually viable. So in conclusion, while Viridescent Venerer is and will probably always be Sucrose's best artifact set, hands down, Gilded Dreams can technically act as a substitute if your Viridescent set is indisposed, meaning you don't actually have one or it's on another unit, whether that unit is in or outside of the Sucrose team. And it will gain value the more your team relies on reaction damage, so yeah, interesting information, do with it what you will. As for your artifact main stats, it will kinda depend on the teams you're in, but much of the time you'll simply just be shooting for the triple elemental mastery main stats on the Goblet, the Sands, and the Circlet. This is important because much of Sucrose's value is tied to how much EM she can share to her teammates, especially in newer strategies such as Dendro teams. But also, the majority of her own damage contribution as a driver comes from her reaction damage, which scales only by level and elemental mastery, even if Sucrose is triggering chain reactions like Aggravate. So yeah, triple EM is what you want to shoot for, but as a temporary solution, you can also run any combination of traditional stats such as Attack Sands, Anemo, Goblet, or Crit Circlet. And as for Sucrose's substats, you'll really only need to focus Energy Recharge and Elemental Mastery, and with Constellations, your energy threshold can become significantly lower, so the safest bet for a generalist Sucrose build is to fully stack Elemental Mastery. As for Sucrose's best weapons, these new Dendro teams can have her fulfill quite a few different roles, so there are actually a few options at your disposal now that are all viable and enjoyable. Luckily too, they're all realistically accessible, since some of the strongest options are craftable 4 stars and some are even 3 stars. Firstly, since Sucrose is capable of chain reacting Dendro reactions such as Aggravate, she can actually very comfortably use Hakushin Ring now. It's a pretty niche but powerful craftable weapon, and before Dendro, the only use Sucrose had for it was on taser teams, which even then was a bit difficult to recommend over sac frags, considering the immense value sac frags gave to her personal reaction damage. But anyways, the interesting thing about Hakushin Ring 2 is that it will grant the elemental damage bonus to all party members involved in the reaction. So if, for example, Fischl and Dendro MC cause Quicken and then Sucrose swirls to chain react aggravate, she's gonna grant herself an anemo damage bonus, Fischl an electro damage bonus, and Dendro MC a Dendro damage bonus all at once. It's a very good weapon to consider for Sucrose's aggravate and hyper bloom teams and is completely free to craft, chef's kiss. But also, as her very popular weapon of choice, you can use sacrificial fragments too. Sac frags grants a very large EM bonus and allows Sucrose a third charge of her elemental skill with the skill cooldown reset on the weapon passive, making this weapon extremely potent when Sucrose is driving teams because her reaction damage will quickly add up. But even outside of driving, the massive EM bonus will help her grant the team even more shared EM, which is great for any reaction-based team Sucrose likes to play on. Generally, this is one of her strongest and most versatile weapons, so if you have it, swag, but if not, there are other options. Sucrose can also pretty comfortably use the new Fruit of Fulfillment weapon. The ER bonus is nice, and the attack loss on the weapon passive can actually be completely avoided since Sucrose's burst snapshots attack upon cast. Thus, you can build up the EM bonus for the purposes of her team buffing and still have that extra bit of her personal damage as well. Plus, the trade-off of attack for EM is less harmful on Sucrose than other units since most of her playstyles heavily rely on her reaction damage, not her personal damage. Basically, this means that Fruit of Fulfillment can be a very suitable free-to-play option for teams in which she's buffing allies and can still be pretty useful in teams where she's driving reactions. My only personal gripe with this weapon though is that at R5 it only gives 180 total elemental mastery, whereas one of Sucrose's 3-star options, Magic Guide, gives 187 elemental mastery without any drawbacks. So if you're simply looking to stack elemental mastery, you would be better off waiting for sac frags or running with Magic Guide, but if you wanted to incorporate Sucrose's burst into her gameplay, Fruit of Fulfillment could gain value over these other options because of the ER substat and her ability to snapshot the burst. And finally, if you want to significantly enhance Sucrose's ability to buff a specific carry, she can use Thrilling Tales. It's a very powerful 3-star weapon that grants a huge attack bonus to your next teammate after swapping Sucrose off the field, and though it won't help her stack EM, it's still potent for DPS units that enjoy this attack, and can be a very powerful option in lots of teams. Finally, with weapons, if you wanted to enhance Sucrose's personal damage, you could slot any number of 5-star catalysts and a bunch of DPS-focused 4-star catalysts, but that's quite obviously not the playstyle this guide is covering, and in general is a niche playstyle that cuts out the part of her kit that makes her Sucrose, so I won't be discussing them in this video. What I will be discussing though is the exciting and powerful new Dendro teams that Sucrose fits into very well. With team comping in 3.0, as I brushed over earlier, Sucrose has gained immense value for her unique role as an elemental mastery buffer, but beyond that, she's an anemo unit, so she can also help teams with her own swirls, chain reactions, and elemental resistance shred if you run with 4-piece Viridescent. These benefits are especially potent in aggravate teams. Aggravate teams typically incorporate at least one electro DPS and one Dendro applicator, and the rest of the slots can be filled by any number of characters, but with Sucrose on this team, she's filling a number of buffing roles simultaneously. Firstly, she'll be able to constantly shred electro resistance on enemies thanks to the fact that electro auras have a very high uptime in aggravate teams, but while doing that, she's also buffing the electro character's elemental mastery with both her 1st and 4th ascension passive, which is extremely valuable for characters like Fischl, who proc a lot of aggravate reactions. I find the most success by running this team with Fischl as my core character, with a 2nd electro unit in the 2nd slot, any Dendro unit in the 3rd slot, and then obviously Sucrose in the 4th slot. However, there are variations of this team in which you can run 1 electro unit, 1 Dendro unit, and then 2 anemo units, which would actually allow you to more comfortably run Gilded Dreams on Sucrose since the other anemo unit can run Viridescent, but I generally only recommend this variation in AoE scenarios since the whole point of 2 anemo units is to maximize on swirl damage and chain reactions. Also, there's a variant where you can run a Dendro DPS as your main carry and then 2 off-field electro carries with Sucrose, because even though spread damage is technically the main goal of the team, there's still a very high amount of aggravates that Sucrose can help amplify. Any of these variations of aggravate can be viable, and though as of right now the strongest and most budget-friendly is the first variant I mentioned, all of them are fun, albeit a little risky since you're usually cutting out survivability by slotting Sucrose. However, by far one of the strongest teams to slot Sucrose in currently is what I believe is referred to as a salad team, in which you run Fischl, Singchul, a Dendro unit, and then in this case Sucrose. And the idea here is that Sucrose is able to drive Fischl and Singchul's off-field abilities to cause a massive hodgepodge of reactions, including Electrocharge, Quicken, Aggravate, Bloom, Hyper Bloom, a little bit of everything, and it's actually very strong. It kind of incorporates the same strengths that we're familiar with in Sucrose's taser teams, because her own contribution here comes from her very high swirl and chain reaction damage output, which allows for very high AoE damage and even still does well in single target as well. You can swap Fischl for other Electro units or Singchul for other Hydro units, but generally that'll turn the team into more of a traditional Hyper Bloom team, since the damage contribution becomes less about their high off-field damage output and more about reaction damage, thus it won't generally be as strong as the Salad team, but it'll still be nice. For example, you could swap Fischl for Kuki so you have more survivability, and or you could swap Xingqiu for Kokomi so that you have a lot of survivability. And Sucrose will still greatly benefit the team's Hyper Bloom damage, which will now play a larger role in the team's total damage output. In regular Bloom and Fridge teams, Sucrose is pretty decent because she can shred Hydro and Cryo Resistance with the Viridescent set, and she'll still grant large EM bonuses to your Hydro trigger, but generally speaking, her ability to crowd control is relatively awkward to work with in Bloom teams, and characters like Kazuha or even Jean can provide a lot more value in the form of elemental damage bonuses and healing, respectively. But that isn't to say that Sucrose isn't functional, just that if you have them, there are more comfortable options to work with. And kinda the same thing can be said about Burgeon teams, but the problem with Sucrose and Burgeon teams is that anemo units have a swirl priority, in which Pyro is number 1, and if you're swirling Pyro, your chances of causing the burning reaction are much higher when you're not careful. Burning is really bad for Burgeon teams because it throws off your ability to create Bloom seeds so that you can consistently Burgeon, blah blah blah. Also, the vast majority of the damage output in Burgeon teams, unlike some of these other teams I mentioned, is actually Burgeon damage, and all Dendro transformative reactions are considered Dendro damage, meaning Sucrose can't shred that with Viridescent. And since there aren't typically that many other sources of high damage in Burgeon teams, it feels like Sucrose's presence leaves a bit to be desired. I will say, running a Burgeon team with, for example, Childe and Xiangling can very much circumvent this issue for Sucrose, since they both provide massive Pyro and Hydro damage, but unless you have Childe, you'll have to run someone like Toma instead of Xiangling, because no one applies Hydro as fast as on-field Childe. In general, Burgeon teams are really weird, and Sucrose isn't usually the most comfortable unit to slot into it as of right now, but she can situationally work. And finally, for newer players who might be unaware, I do want to very quickly brush over some of Sucrose's other notable teams, those of which that we've already had access to even before 3.0. My personal favorite is Sucrose Taser, in which you run Sucrose with Xingqiu, Beidou, and Fischl for the purposes of having Sucrose drive all of their abilities. In doing so, Sucrose causes a very large amount of swirls and chain reactions with Electrocharge that adds up to high team damage, and for a long time it was a very underrated team comp, but nowadays people recognize its value. And finally, any teams in which Sucrose can find value by buffing a carry unit. So for example, with Pyro units like Yoimiya, Yanfei, Diluc, and even Hu Tao in some teams, Sucrose plays exceptionally well for buffing their vape damage and shredding resistances for the teams. Throw me in jail, I just forgot Xiangling. And there are other cool team archetypes out there for Sucrose, such as Sukokomon, Xiao Battery, etc., but that about sums up everything I wanted to talk about regarding Sucrose in 3.0. She's always been a valuable and unique unit, but Dendro has very much amplified her strengths and has allowed her to enjoy a lot of cool and powerful new content that feels refreshing, especially for someone like me who would literally die before I choose Sucrose over Kazuha. For the purposes of not being cancelled on Twitter, I did not say that. If you enjoyed this video or it helped you in any way, please leave a like and consider subscribing because it very much helps my channel and I would appreciate it. Also, feel free to join my Discord server because my community is super cool and welcoming, and I want to start doing cool events on Discord. It's like my home. Anyways, I'm gonna head out because I literally do not know what other videos to make before 3.1 comes out. I gotta go brainstorm.